Another Boeing whistleblower has tragically passed away.
Sudden infection.
Another Boeing whistleblower died by suicide.
Why are Boeing whistleblowers mysteriously dying?
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Today we're taking another look at Boeing after a second whistleblower died last week. Joshua Dean was just 45 and had been in good health before contracting a deadly infection. 2 months prior, John Barnett was found dead in his car, having apparently shot himself. Both men had complained that defects with Boeing planes had been covered up. The third whistleblower, Sam Salehpour, wept in front of Congress as he told them he'd received death threats. In a moment, we'll hear from a pilot who has some very disturbing revelations about recent flights. But first, here's the story of the three whistleblowers.
This is not a 737 problem, it's a Boeing problem. Back in 2012, Boeing started removing inspection operations off their jobs, so it left the mechanics to buy off their own work.
We are learning this morning that a former employee turned whistleblower was found dead.
Barnett retired from Boeing in 2017 after working as a quality manager for more than 30 years. Since his departure, he has taken legal action against the company, claiming he was retaliated against for raising safety issues internally.
From day one, it's just all been about schedule and hurry up and just get it done, push the planes out. We're behind schedule. You know, we don't have time to worry about issues that y'all bring up.
Barnett was found dead in his truck from what the coroner says was an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Do you believe this was a suicide?
The investigation is going on right now, and yeah, we're not going to go to that. We're going to wait and see what the investigation brings out.
A close family friend of Barnett says he predicted he might wind up dead, that a story could surface that he killed himself. But he told her, don't believe it.
I know that he did not commit suicide. There's no way.
It's happened again. Joshua Dean, a former quality auditor who sounded the alarm about a supplier who'd been ignoring defects in the production of Boeing's 737 MAX jets, is dead. Joshua Dean died earlier this week after multiple diagnoses, including the flu, pneumonia, and MRSA.
Dean was a former quality auditor at Boeing supplier Spirit Aerosystems. He was one of the first whistleblowers to accuse Spirit leadership of ignoring manufacturing defects on 737 MAX planes.
Spirit Aerosystems reportedly manufactured the door that blew out on the Alaska Airlines flight, 16,000 feet in the air.
We own our supply chain, we own Spirit, we own the results of our work.
Dean eventually got canned for pointing out that there was a bunch of holes drilled into planes where holes shouldn't be drilled. Dean was let go from what he called an act of retaliation.
In an interview, he said, I think they were sending out a message to anybody else. If you are too loud, we will silence you.
The optics here, let's face it, are not good. We've had 4 whistleblowers come forward that we know of, 2 of which have now passed away.
Dean was represented by the same law firm that represented Boeing whistleblower John Mitch Barnett.
Joshua Dean and John Barnett's attorney Brian Knowles described the 2 men as heroes who wanted to help the company do better.
Bombshell claims from a new Boeing whistleblower, the employee saying engineering issues could cause some Boeing planes to break apart.
I'm not here today because I want to be here. I'm here today because I felt that I must come forward. I have serious concerns about the safety of the 787 and 777 aircraft. I literally saw people jumping on the pieces of the airplane to get them to align. I call it the Tarzan effect, among other improper methods. Again, I raised concerns internally. I was sidelined. I was told to shut up. I received physical threats. My boss said, I would have killed someone who said what you said in a meeting.
You described your life was being threatened. Do you feel that this style of retaliation against you has been part of Boeing's efforts to silence and prevent you from sharing your story?
And they call you on your personal phone to let you know that they know where you live, they know where you are, and they can hurt you. It really scares me, believe me. But I am at peace. You know, if something happens to me, I am at peace.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And Captain Dennis Tajer is an airline pilot who often flies Boeing 737 MAX. We also have Shawn Pruchnicki, an aviation safety expert who was at that Senate hearing with Sam Salehpour. And finally, David Colapinto, founder of the National Whistleblowers Centre. Welcome, all three of you. Shawn Pruchnicki, if I can start with you. You were with Sam Salehpour when he was making and giving that emotional testimony. We ended that report with him saying, if something happens to me, I am at peace. He sounds like he's under incredible pressure at Boeing.
He most certainly is. I mean, this is an environment, this is a very hostile environment that he's working in. And the things that he's been told, the things that he's seeing going on around him, I certainly can understand why he would make a comment like that. The things that we heard in his testimony, I could see why he would make this comment. And he is very much afraid. And it's a shame that he has to work in that type of environment. And these types of folks that come forward, and I think Sam is certainly a hero. The guts that it takes to come forward and do this, and I certainly applaud him and the others that have done this.
Does he genuinely fear for his life?
I believe he does. The things that he said in that Senate hearing, I had not seen his transcript prior to that. And when I was sitting up there with him, I was, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say alarmed. I was alarmed with what I heard him say and talking with him afterwards. And I believe he does feel that way, which goes together with what you had just said, that his comments about being at peace. And I think there are others that feel that way as well, and for good reasons, for the things that they've heard.
Dennis, from what I understand, you're not at all surprised by Sam Salehpour's testimony.
Not at all. This is right out of the playbook of Boeing. Up until just recent days, whenever somebody comes up and sees something not going well and says something, they're treated with a level of contempt, intimidation, threat, or actual retribution. We've seen this isolation where suddenly that professional, that hero, and that term has been used. It's actually an understatement because these men have put their well-being before others to keep passengers safe. So we've seen Boeing, it's this cultural problem that if you speak up, you will likely be put on the sidelines, and they won't stop there. This level of contempt for the actual people who fly the airplanes, pilots, who we saw during the 2 crashes of the Maxes about 5 years ago, just continue throughout the organization. This is a couple decades in the making, and this culture isn't going to change overnight.
Let's just hear from Sam again, telling senators that something very suspicious happened with his car. Let's have a listen.
Mr. Salehpour, I showed you earlier a photograph of a tire wheel from your car. That bolt was inserted by someone as a threat, perhaps as a risk to you.
Yes, I was losing just air on my tire, and I bring it somewhere, and they say, hey, you have a nail in the tire. That's about 1 month old tire. I went to pick it up, and the gentleman told me that, this nail was not picked up through normal driving. The bottom line is that, yes, the nail was inserted in there. I believe it happened at work. I have no proof of that.
David, you've represented many whistleblowers over the decades. In your experience, do they ever face physical threats?
Oh, yeah. In a situation like Boeing, where there is a corporate culture of placing profits and production ahead of safety, this is a common problem. But but like the other person just said, it takes years for this to happen. The fact that a publicly traded company as large as Boeing would allow this to go on for years and years is really shocking, even though people who are familiar with the company apparently see this as business as usual. This is something that is the result of a culture that permits intimidation and harassment. I've seen cases where people at nuclear power plants have been threatened, have been burned in effigy, have been harassed in similar fashion. I've never seen people die, but it is a scary situation, and it sends a message, a shoot the messenger message to the rest of the workforce, and creates a chilling effect, which is the desired result here. is that employees not speak up, not stop the production line, and just continue to close their eyes to these safety issues.
And which part of his testimony did you find most unsettling?
The part to me that was most unsettling was where he said that it was clear they were ignoring repeated concerns by knowledgeable people within the company, that there were serious issues, and that his conclusion that the company was cutting corners at the expense of safety.
Yeah. Shawn, on the specifics of his complaint then about Boeing safety, he said that he saw people jumping on parts in order to make them fit properly, and that he had concerns that there were gaps in the fuselage, which over time would potentially kill hundreds of people. Now, let's just hear from Boeing, if I may. They say, in 13 years of service, the global 787 fleet has safely transported more than 850 million passengers on more than 4.2 million flights. A 787 can safely operate for at least 30 years before needing expanded airframe maintenance routines. Extensive and rigorous testing of the fuselage and heavy maintenance checks of nearly 700 in-service airplanes to date have found zero evidence of airframe fatigue. So who do you believe, Shawn?
I don't believe Boeing at all. And this is, okay, that's a press release. That's meant to calm the general public. This is not how we build airplanes. This is not how we got to the point as being as safe as we are on a global scale. This is not how we got to being this safe. Sure, there hasn't been an accident of a 787 up to date, but that doesn't mean 5 years from now or 10 years from now that there's going to be a structural problem. We don't build airplanes this way. So I think it's ridiculous that they would put something out like this. Well, I can see why they're doing it, trying to deflect and trying to calm the masses. But there's many of us that are knowledgeable about how airplanes are built and how we fly these airplanes, that they're not fooling many of us. That's a ridiculous
Sam Salehpour is arguing for the entire 787 fleet, perhaps 1,000 aircraft upwards, to be grounded.
Well, if I can interject here, what Shawn just mentioned was that you can't measure safety by the absence of accidents. You have to investigate the accidents before they happen. And clearly Boeing, that statement, Shawn's right, it's a PR statement. It sounds like it's from the law offices of Boeing, and Boeing. And there's cynicism in there. But you can see that this all comes from the garden of not trusting Boeing. And that is the deep hole that they are in. And since the Alaska door blew off the airplane, it's just that the hole has gotten even deeper. And until and unless Boeing actually changes the output, because they've grabbed the thesaurus and found wonderful words to show how much they've learned. But when they get into the shop, even the federal government, the U.S. Federal government got into the shops of Boeing and came out with a report just a handful of weeks ago saying, Boeing has changed, but not very much. So Boeing has changed just enough to remain the same. And this is the toxic environment we're in. And the one last thing I want to mention on this whistleblower side, and I've been involved in this in the first two crashes with a union standing behind me calling out, why didn't you even tell us this was on the airplane? Here's the real problem. The roots of this contempt for fellow workers calling out, hey, this doesn't look right, just like they do in the cockpit when I'm captain and my first officer says, hey, Captain, I think we're not getting this right. The level of contempt, you now have like a mafia style group of folks that are out there in the ranks who think this is the way you run business because it's been run that way their entire career. So it's a human factor issue as much as production and engineering.
David, Sam Salehpour, final question on him before we move on to the others. He's still working at Boeing and is protected by his whistleblower status, but his life is very uncomfortable there.
Yes, I mean, what the captain just said is correct. It's the bullying, it's the peer pressure that People what I have heard in other cases is that coworkers believe that if the whistleblower is successful and the line is shut down, production stops, they'll lose their jobs. That's one of the things that contributes to the company's culture of harassment of people who speak up, who raise these issues. And, you know, Mr. Salehpour is very much at risk, even though he is, quote unquote, legally protected under Air 21 and other laws. That's not going to, you know, make you sleep well at night if the result of that is you're going to face years of litigation if you get fired or removed or suspended, and you're going to face aggressive litigation from the Boeing lawyers, and that's going to be costly. It has personal consequences as well.
That brings us fairly appropriately on to John Barnett, really, because the coroner who examined his body said he died from self-inflicted gunshot wounds. I understand the police investigation is still going on. His family intimate that the battle with Boeing, if he did kill himself, then that pressure was enough to push him over the edge. Have you heard of this sort of thing before with whistleblowers?
Oh, absolutely. And it's the personal toll that it takes on whistleblowers who face retaliation and then have to sue to get their job back. These cases can go on for 5, 10 years. In the case of Mr. Barnett, it took OSHA, the Occupational Safety Health Administration arm of the Department of Labor, which is charged under Air 21 to investigate whistleblower retaliation complaints. It took them 4 years to investigate Mr. Barnett's retaliation claim. And the statute, the Air 21 statute, says that investigation should be done in 60 days. So the government is not blameless here.
In John Barnett's case, his whistleblower complaint was that he had to quit in 2017 after raising the safety concerns because Boeing retaliated and undermined his career because of his objections. Now, the Department of Labor, or OSHA's, the section of the Department of Labor, OSHA, that you mentioned, actually found in favor of Boeing. Do you think that John Barnett would have won his appeal that he was in the middle of when he died?
It is not unusual for whistleblowers to lose the investigation stage. There is what is called a de novo review by the Office of Administrative Law Judges, where Mr. Barnett would have had the opportunity to go to a trial in front of the ALJ. That process was still in discovery at the time of his death. My understanding is the discovery process was almost concluded and that there was a trial set by the ALJ to take place later this spring. Unfortunately, due to his untimely and tragic death, we will never know whether he would have won. But, very often employees who are whistleblowers fare better at the hearing stage than the investigation stage.
Dennis Tajer, let's move on now to Joshua Dean, the latest whistleblower to die. His complaints and concerns, he was working, of course, at Spirit Aerosystems, were regarding improperly drilled holes at in the aft pressure bulkhead. Now, that's in the 737 MAX, which is the plane that you fly. First of all, what is the specific technical concerns there, and are you worried about continuing to fly that plane?
Well, these are, there have been so much that's mentioned here, but what we see is systemically the same problem. Building the 787, they talk about force fit up. Force fit up. That's like the Boeing term to fit two things together. Airplanes are not IKEA furniture. You can't just pressure them down and not have a potential side effect down the line. Misdrilled holes, the aft bulkhead. Airplanes are a symphony of safety, and if you intentionally do not put every note in the right place, it's a horrid result with consequences that we all know. Your viewers get it. If an airplane is not built safely, properly maintained, it falls on my lap to get the airplane back safely. And if you layer so many things in there, like chafing wires where electrical systems are firing off, and Boeing has disclosed on the airplane I fly, because of improperly installed wiring, some flight controls can just flash up out of nowhere, and then I'm dealing with returning the aircraft to safe flight. So this aircraft continues to be disclosures of is riddled with these imperfect procedures to put the airplane together, and in some cases engineering. We just got one the other day regarding an engine failure on the MAX. Uniquely to the MAX engine, there's something on it that can cause an engine failure, and Southwest Airlines has had 2 already where a bird was ingested. Smoke pours into the airplane, into the cockpit or the cabin, and now pilots are warned, if you have one of these, note you're going to have to get your oxygen on and deal with what we call a compound emergency close to the ground with one of the most challenging emergencies you can have, an engine coming undone. So is the airplane safe? As long as you tell me what could come into my cockpit, whether it's an unforced error or a misdesigned feature, being prepared for these things is the key to survival.
It's a bit worrying, though, from a passenger's point of view, that it's only thanks to a very experienced and talented pilot like yourself that these faults are being dealt with as you fly.
And that's a great point. Flying is not about perfect flights. I've been doing this for over 38 years, and I've never had a perfect flight. It's about trapping the errors. And errors happen through natural wear and tear. They happen with me. I've made errors in the flight deck. Sometimes they're small. I miss an altitude and my first officer catches it, or air traffic control does. When the aircraft has an error, not an engineering misdesign, but something breaks, that's what I'm there for. So you've got to know that the last line of defense are the pilots, but Boeing is counting on us as kind of the single point of failure. Don't worry, if we screw up, the pilots will get this. They'll take care of it. That's not how this is done. You've got to have layers of protection and redundancy, and they're getting to the point where they just got it down to, well, the pilots know how to handle this. We told them, and that's just not how you run a business. I've flown Boeing aircraft in the military, in combat, and it protected me from the enemy outside the airplane. It saved my life. Now it feels like the enemy is within.
That's awful. David Colapinto, we're coming towards the end of the program. As you know, the CEO is stepping down at the end of this year, and a few other senior managers as well. Do you think Boeing is now taking this seriously and is about to turn a corner, or are they going to stick to their old ways?
Well, that's hard to say because not being there, it's hard to determine how deeply embedded this culture, this corporate culture is. You can change the faces, but it's really the actions that the new regime will have to take, and sending a message of quality and safety and not tolerating retaliation or harassment throughout the organization. It's a big challenge, as it was said earlier by Dennis, that this is years in the making. This is not something that's going to be solved overnight just by changing the leadership or issuing press releases. It's going to be action that is required. It's also going to take strong action and enforcement by the FAA and the Department of Labor and other agencies that are involved in regulating this industry. And there's much to be done. And to say that it will just happen and they've turned a corner, I think would be kind of wishful thinking.
Something has happened in the last 48 hours. They put out a press release about there was someone who saw something happen on the line, and they brought it to the manager's attention, and they put in the release that that individual was celebrated, and they're glad they did that, and that they were going to handle the people out on the line that were making the mistakes very seriously and very sternly. And this, once again, this is coming from the attorney. This is telling me that Boeing still doesn't understand. I've been brought into this whole process as the safety culture expert. This has been part of my life's work. And once again, they don't understand. This is not how you run a safety culture. What they need to be doing is trying to understand why the people on the front line are making those decisions and have done those things rather than firing them or punishing them. So, once again, Boeing's putting out this press release that makes it sound good that, that they're punishing the people on the front line for making these mistakes. But all it does is illustrates that Boeing still has no idea what they're doing when it comes to a safety culture. We're back where we started still. It's just window dressing.
Shawn, you nailed it. This is not about the people who made that choice. It's about the system that created that. So these are not men and women who said, let's just not do the checks. There's some other pressure going on. So Boeing moved from condemning a whistleblower to commending them, but it's optics because the system is what needs to be repaired.
Dennis Tajer, Shawn Pruchnicki, and David Colapinto, thank you all very much for your contributions today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube, type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.